Okay then, so we got to this point where we understand binary and hex, so we know how data is stored, how it's represented in a computer. We know that devices that are computers, like, have an interaction between their compute, their CPU, and their storage, where they keep the binary, right? And then we convinced ourselves that these devices can communicate because we went through all the methods by which they can communicate, which is one, through a wire using electricity, and two, using radio waves, which is the wireless piece of this. So, what I want to talk about next, which starts to get really interesting, is the infrastructure that's required in order to start having an internet. Infrastructure. There we are. So, start here. So, the first thing I want to say is that there is another kind of way that that binary can be sent. So we talked about wires, we talked about electricity, which is basically how the stuff inside the computer communicates, and also some of the larger infrastructure is electrical. We talked about how the radio waves can be used, which allows us to have Wi-Fi and wireless connections between like our cell phone and the router, for example. But another one that is also important, and it's going to come up in this video, is fiber optic. And fiber optic, we're not going to go over exactly how fiber optic works because, to be honest, I don't know. But what I do know is that fiber optic is light. So it uses light in these very special wires, which basically transmit light. And I'm going to assume that the brightness is important, the number of photons, something like that. And I'm going to assume that you can control the amount of light and therefore the amount of photons, because the more photons there are, the lighter something is, to send binary basically. So maybe like completely dark means it's not working, but dim means 0. And like bright means bright, oh my god, equals 1. Something like that. It's probably not like this. It's probably way more complicated than I'm making it sound. But I think it gets the point across. So if I send a message and, this orange kind of is bright, and then let's go with, I don't know, so black seems too much. Let's say yellow is bright and orange is, yeah, that's better. And then orange, that's another dim light. That's another this here. What we've sent is where's my black? There we are. We've sent 0, 1, 0, 1, right? Which we know equals 5 because the number of 1s, the number of 2s, the number of 4s. There's 1, 4 and 1, 1. Therefore, it's 5. Cool. So with that little aside, we are now ready to start talking about the infrastructure that makes the internet work. And now I didn't actually know how all of this worked before I made this video. So I actually went and did a few videos myself on YouTube to just like refresh on everything. I'll make sure to put those in the comments. But this is what I learned basically. This is what I learned in a simplified way. You have a neighborhood, okay? And we went through last time how you send the message to your router, the router sends it to the wall is connected to a wire, which connects into the internet, basically. But every single house has kind of a wire coming out of it, right? And the street itself is connected to the same kind of wire. So we get something like this, let's say. Okay, like that. And then these all end up connecting at some point in some kind of box, right? Now, depending on the technology that's used, like, when you order internet, you can get fiber optic, you can get DSL, you can get cable, you can get all kinds of things. Depending on the technology, the reason that there's different words at all is because there's just different methods and different devices that are needed in between in order to send signals over the wire, right? And I'm not going to go into that. I don't even understand that. It's not that important. The point I'm trying to make here is that once we get that signal to the router and the router sends it to the wall, we are now sending, and I'll use blue for this, we are now sending the binary as electrical signals through this wire. That's supposed to be a lightning bolt. Until it gets to this box. Now, what ends up happening is that this box is like a street box or a neighborhood box, you might say. And according to the video I watched, I think they said like 40 to maybe 500 houses might have all of their signals kind of streamed into one place. And then once it gets to that one place, they are sent onwards to like greater and greater levels of sticking stuff together. And so it's here that there are going to be devices to figure out where your signal is going to go. Now, there's something called an IP address. The IP address is your like address if you're trying to send a message on the internet, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're just going to assume that when you send a message to the internet, you tell it where you want it to go, and that there's stuff in it, the stuff that like gets it there. So your message leaves your house, it ends up going through the street wires, everyone's messages like slapped together. We get to this box of 40 to 500 that covers 40 to 500 people. And then through various levels, basically, it ends up going through the infrastructure of your ISP. Okay? So I'm going to write this big box, and you can imagine that this 40 to 500 becomes a network of other devices and other places for the signal to go that's completely different depending on who's managing it, right? So at this point, we can't really zoom in and say, oh, we know exactly what's going on. But what I can tell you is that the person responsible for this infrastructure being in place and the thing responsible for how that internal box of stuff we don't know is set up, it's called your ISP, which is your internet service provider. Internet service provider. And depending on the country, these are just different companies, right? So for me in Canada, we have like Videotron and Bell and other providers. In America, AT&T is a big one. I don't know about Australia and New Zealand or China, but there's an internet service provider, and basically this is a centralized company. They are a business. They are a for-profit business that services the population of a country by building the physical infrastructure required to make the internet run. And so if that doesn't like set off alarms in your head, and you're not as cynical as me maybe, because what that means is that all of the messages that everyone sends are going through machines owned by a specific company, right? But there are reasons why this shouldn't alarm you too much. There are reasons why it should alarm you, but there are reasons why it shouldn't alarm you also because of stuff like encryption. But we're not going to talk about encryption today. Just believe that your messages, when they're being sent, there is a way to make it safe, even though there is a central point at which all of those signals go through. Okay, so enough of that. So once you get to the ISP though, right, like they've got a bunch of like crazy equipment. You might think to yourself, right, great, we can easily get to another neighborhood, right? Like if I take some houses over here like that, how do you do this? Copy them. So there's another neighborhood somewhere else in the country, right? On the same island. They've got the same things going on. They've got their box, right? And that box eventually gets them to the ISP's infrastructure, which we don't really know what's going on there. It's pretty easy to imagine that like your message that you sent can get through to that person because, Jimmy Bob over here sends it through his wire and it stays basically the entire time as an electrical signal, going from node to node within the ISP. and eventually getting to this wire here. But, and this is where my knowledge broke down, what happens when you get to the ocean? You want to send your message from Canada over to Europe, for example. What do you do? And there are many ways to do it. The first thing you might think is like, okay, well, we have satellites. So I drew my little satellite up here. And so then you might start to use, let's make radio waves purple. You might use some kind of radio wave style technology that can communicate over very long distances. You might send a signal up to a satellite like that, and then have it reflect back down over the ocean to where you want to go. The problem is that while that does work, satellites are something like, I think it's 24,000 kilometers. Is that right? Above the Earth's surface, something like that. And the further you want to send a radio wave, the more power it takes. So this can be a very slow, very high latency. Latency means how long it takes for the message to get from one place to another. It could take a very long time for the message to get over the ocean, and it just wouldn't work for the high-speed internet that we have today. So, what's the other solution? Well, it turns out, from the other people on YouTube, I found this out. Basically, there are massive, like thousands of kilometers long fiber optic cables across the ocean, going between countries. And I really didn't know that this was true, but I found this picture on the internet. Not that one. That was another thing here that I'll zoom in on for you. This picture here, I'll put it here, is a map of all of the fiber optic cables that exist in the world right now. And I assume it's accurate. Like, I have no way of verifying if this is true. And I think one of the things that was really interesting about what I was looking at is that countries could snip these cables if they wanted to. Let's say you're at war with someone like, I don't know, maybe the United States and Russia are at war. Either one of them could try and find these cables and slice them. And if they slice them, they would basically break off internet infrastructure communication between whatever nodes that they sliced, right? So the ability for us to intercommunicate over countries is highly, highly dependent on the fact that there are physical fiber optic cables that take our messages across the ocean. So basically invisible to us and unknown to us, including me, and I've been in software for 5 years now and haven't really thought about this. The reason that we can get across the ocean is because our electrical signals at the edge of the coast become light signals that send binary in massive packets across the ocean. So that's the infrastructure that allows all of this to exist. And the really important takeaway is basically that what I said last video about communication, this is basically just formalizing a bit and talking about some of the real industry that is involved in taking those signals and kind of like piecing them all together as things go through. So I hope that was useful. And next time, I think we might even see some actual code.